You're listening to the Custom Built Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to discuss how to avoid costly mistakes and how to be prepared for unexpected costs in your home renovation. So stay tuned. One major thing that we should be focusing on when we're getting into a home renovation is making sure when we're creating our budget that we are setting aside a contingency. And so a contingency is just if something pops up that we were not expecting, that we may need to fix, it's there. It's a little bit of a cushion for doing any type of repair that's outside of that home renovation. So if you have a $100,000 home renovation, set aside at least 10%. So that should be about 10 grand. So if something were to pop up, you have 10 grand to put towards that. And we're talking about hidden costs versus costly mistakes, right? These are two very different things. A mistake is more of being prepared for having things in place. So if paying a contractor up front would be a mistake, a very costly mistake. If you find plumbing that was no longer viable in your walls, that's a surprise. So we have two separate things happening here, but the contingency is still important to have regardless of what you may or may not run into. So being prepared for your home renovation and with your budget will just take a lot of that stress off of you and just make it so that you are mostly prepared for what may pop up. So let's go right into it. So a costly mistake, like I said, the first one I have is paying a contractor up front. So let's just say you hire a contractor, you pay them up front for the entire job so they could pay for their materials, they could pay for the labor, but they don't show up. And now you can't get a hold of them. And now they're gone with your money and you have no work or half work finished. That would be a very costly mistake because what are your options at this point? You can call them, you could try and get your money back, you could try to hire lawyers, but you're still going to need to get that work done. So now you're paying for lawyer bills and then now you're paying another contractor to fix it. And now are you going to be more reluctant to hire another contractor to fix something that should have been taken care of in the first place? So that's a major costly mistake. What really can happen or what should happen in the beginning is setting up a draw schedule. A draw schedule is just saying you're going to do the demo first and then I'll pay you X amount. Whatever you guys agree on, it really doesn't matter as long as it makes sense for the budget, if it makes sense for that. But I mean, you can pay them like a half up front for that or just a percentage and then hold a little bit of that demo. For example, I'm using this as an example. Your first part of your renovation, you're demoing, right? So the demo is going to cost you $8,000. You can pay them up to $4,000. You can pay them up to $6,000, but make sure you're holding on to some of that money at the end. So that way, when you go through and walk through that first part of the demo, you make sure that one, they did it properly. Two, there's not any damage that was done. I've had demo where they've taken a shower out and they've cut the pipes on accident. And so now we have to fix the plumbing. So things like that can definitely pop up. Those are human errors, but with having that money withheld, now you can make sure that they fix that properly and they're paying for their mistake, not you. Number two is not having a schedule for your repairs. So again, if you hire a contractor and they are not willing to provide you with a work schedule, that's a red flag. You want to know what's happening along the way. Again, for these draw schedules, you want to be able to have a system in place where you can hold them accountable and they can hold you accountable. Because if you're not paying, as you're saying, why would they come back and show up for that job? So this is a two-way street here. This isn't just let's make sure that we're covering our backs for the contractors because it's also their livelihood. We need to make sure that they're protected. So a draw schedule is something that's important for both sides. A work schedule is also something that is covering both parties in this renovation. So no schedule, making sure you have that, that's a red flag if they don't have one. So following the schedule, because the longer it takes for a job to get done, so if a demo is supposed to take only a week, but now you're in week 2, that's time that you're spending in another area. So if you're not staying in your home and you're in a hotel or an Airbnb, now you're an extra week in your Airbnb because they took too long than they said. If they are not sticking to their schedule so early up in the job, that's a fair sign to say they're not going to continue to hold themselves accountable and hit the schedule as they said. So that's a red flag in multiple ways. So having a schedule just allows everybody to know what's happening when they're happening. And if something should cause a delay, because delays will happen, especially if we're expecting materials to come in and they're taking a little bit longer, that's out of, their builder's control. You want to make sure that they're communicating it. And if they're continually showing a pattern of pushing back your schedule, that I would say is questionable. You want to make sure what's happening and what's real are the same thing. So, for example, we had a contractor who was very good at what he does. However, we would allow him to purchase the material, and he would use that for his advantage. So he'd be like, oh, yeah, it's going to take another week for that to come in. It's going to take another month. While in reality, what was happening was he was overscheduling himself and using those material timelines or the fact that they were going to take longer to push back his schedule. So not ideal. And when you see that kind of pattern happening, you want to speak up and say what's going on here. Another costly mistake that you want to avoid is not having an agreement. So making sure there's contracts involved. Again, this is all about accountability. These are the draw schedules. This is the work schedule. This is what you expect them to do during this project. What times are they going to be there? What's the agreed upon cost? This way, halfway through they can't be like, oh, actually this is going to cost us a lot more money and we didn't realize that. That's not your fault. That's their miscalculations. Now, if you're changing, this actually goes into the next one, but if you're making a change halfway through your project, that is a costly mistake. You want to make sure you have all your selections. So for what I was saying, if your contractor halfway says, this is actually costing way more than it's supposed to, you can ask why. If it's not because you've changed anything and it's strictly because they miscalculated, again, that's not your problem. But now you have an agreement that says this is the agreed upon price. If you don't have an agreement like that and they decide to change the price, what do you have to fall back on to make sure that you're covered? What can happen though if you make a big change in the middle of your project. So if you say, you know what, I don't want this wall here. I see that now. Let's take this out. Now you're doing a time delay. You're doing a cost change, right? And then you make a change order. Change orders are important. Same thing goes for if you're changing like a fixture. If you didn't have a selection for like a plumbing fixture or tile or whatever the material is, you just want to make sure if you have as many selections as you can before going into a project, because that indecisive or not having it selected prior to starting your project can really delay the job, and it could cost a lot more by waiting. If you had to rush order it, pushing off the job, now you're waiting. Now the crew is being pushed back, so you're messing up the schedule all around. So that's a costly mistake that is completely avoidable if you take the time to take care of that prior to your renovation. That's all part of that pre-planning. Not knowing the rules and regulations in your jurisdiction. So it's important to know if you need to follow certain guidelines and codes. I mean, most places have where you need to file a permit if you're making a big renovation or if you're adding an addition. There's going to be easements. There's going to be rules and regulations. If you're disrupting the ground, you may need to do soil testing. Also, if it's the cost of your home. So here in Charleston, South Carolina, you need to bring your home up to code if the work that you are doing is about 50% of your home value. So if your home value is 100,000 and your home renovation is 200,000, you're going to be required to bring your home up to code. So if your plumbing is old, if your electrical's old, you're going to have to be fixing that. So that would be one of those hidden costs because you didn't know you had to fix your plumbing or your electrical, but it's also a costly mistake because you could have known that ahead of time and planned for it. So again, the contingency is really important, especially for things like that. And not firing the contractor when it's time to cut ties. That is another costly mistake that you want to avoid. So if they are consistently making mistakes, if they are consistently not showing up, if they are consistently not finishing on time, and they are trying to change the schedule on you, materials questionably, why are they taking longer when they should have not? All of these are times where you might want to pump the brakes with a contractor. If they are not building your home to code, again, this is another thing. You don't need to be an expert in your codes and your jurisdiction, but just having a baseline knowledge or at least understanding where you can go to look this up. So if you're watching them do something and it looks a little fishy, trust yourself in that, okay? Just because you're not an expert in building doesn't mean you don't take a moment to look it up and maybe ask for a second opinion. That's okay. And putting all your trust in one person because they're the professional is, you want to give them the trust, and 100% you want to give trust in them. But again, if they are showing you patterns, if they are doing something, their crew is doing something that you find is questionable, you should be able to go to them and be like, this doesn't seem right. Can we go over this? Can you show me how this is part of the code? Whatever it is, but there should be that open communication. And if they're really defensive about that, that's a red flag. I don't care who you are. If you're really defensive about the work you're doing, I'm going to question you. And now my trust it's not great. I don't trust you anymore for getting really defensive over your work. And that also comes back down to being able to have that open communication. You want to find the right contractor that you feel comfortable having a conversation with. This is a partnership. This isn't one person is the expert, so they're going to tell you how it's going to get done. No, this is also your home and what you're going to expect to be done, and you're going to set those guidelines. So the agreements, finding the right people, these are all things that all come together. So getting back to firing somebody when you need to, I'll kind of go over a story here. In one of my first jobs I had, we had a timeline. They had to redo all the drywall in a garage. It was a 2-car garage, so it was pretty big, but nothing insane. We had about, I think, a week to do all the drywall, put it up and have it mudded and primed, because I don't believe it was painted. Yeah, I think it was just paint ready, which means, it's taped, it's mudded, it's sanded, and that's about it. So a week isn't crazy for the amount of drywall that they needed to do. However, we're 4 days in and they hardly had any of the drywall finished up on the ceiling. And so if we're a week, if 7 days, 7 business days is the time that we have to get this work done, and we're 4 days in and we're not even halfway through, I got to stop and we got to say, what is going on? So, you want to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just had like a couple of people out. That happens. Talk to them. But at day 4 and things aren't showing up and doing what they need to be doing, that at that point was when I had to say, all right, y'all are out. I'm going to get another crew in, and they're going to come in and they're going to do it. And that crew was able to come in and finish and maintain a very close enough time frame. However, because I didn't fire or move fast enough, it took a little bit longer. And so that homeowner obviously wasn't super pleased with the timeline, but we were able to get it done without it costing another week or two. Just a mistake that should have been handled way sooner. I had another drywaller try to put the wrong size drywall on an exterior wall and then try to hide it. And then also try to tell me that they could just mud it out to size. And so not only were they hiding it, and then they tried to do something that was, 1, against code, and 2, sloppy. I mean, that would never have looked good anyway, having to come out a half inch with mud. It would have looked horrible. So again, I fired them and hired somebody else, and then also discovered that they didn't put the insulation in the wall like they were supposed to. And then they tried to cover that up as well. So just making that call sooner than later is going to save you time and money and frustration in the long run when it comes to your home renovation. So these are some costly mistakes to avoid. I'm going to just run through them one more time. Paying the contractor up front. Don't do that. Set a draw schedule. Having a schedule for the work you need to do and having them being held accountable. 3, have an agreement for the work that needs to be done. That way we can't be changing things up. We can't be changing the schedule. We can't be changing the price. Everything is written out, and everyone should be following that agreement. 4, not knowing what you want prior to starting your renovation. Make your decisions, make your selections before you start. This is huge. This is one of those major things that will derail the schedule and your budget fast if those aren't picked ahead of time. Knowing your jurisdiction and the rules and codes that you need to follow will be beneficial for you to just know what to look out for. Number 6 is firing a contractor when it's time to fire a contractor. It might seem scary. You might be like, what am I supposed to do? This work's never going to get done. But I'll tell you right now, the longer you hold on to a contractor that's not holding up to their end, it's just going to be more frustration for you in the long run. And you're going to wish you fired them and hired somebody else when you first, found this issue coming up. So doing it sooner than later is scary, but necessary. And it will benefit you in the long run. So you might lose a little bit of time, but it's going to be a lot less frustrating for you to get through a job with somebody that's not really honoring your agreement, your schedule, or maybe even your boundaries for what you set there. So those are your costly mistakes that you can avoid if you do a little bit of pre-planning. But what about your hidden costs? Those are something completely separate, right? So we still have that contingency that we set aside. You want to make sure that you, again, know what your rules are for your area. So when you open up a wall and you see that your plumbing or your electrical is old and you find out that you need to upgrade, that would be one of those hidden costs. Those are, kind of go hand in hand with knowing and not knowing, like an avoidable cost plus a hidden cost. But it's not so hidden if you have that contingency. If you know what age home you have, you should have an idea of, and you don't know the history of your home. So for example, our home was it's an older home and it's not updated. However, we know the homeowners from before us had their family friend, and we know that they did a lot of the major hidden work. So they updated the electrical, they updated the roof, they updated HVAC. So those are all things that aren't like the pretty aspects of a home, but they're necessary. So when we bought this house, now it's just really like, let's get this more modern. And so, or more to our taste even. So those are things that won't be a hidden cost for us in the future because we know the electrical now, assuming that the electrical was done correctly and the plumbing and whatever else was done, or the roof and the HVAC. But this is stuff that wouldn't be necessarily a hidden cost. But what could be a hidden cost for our home is lead paint or asbestos. So if your home was built before 1978, you run into the risk that your home has lead paint or asbestos somewhere in your home. It could be the shingles on the outside. It could be within the drywall and the mud and the compounds that they use to build your home. So what could be a smaller renovation could cost you thousands of more money because you didn't know about the asbestos and lead. What's the word? Abatement. So having an abatement company come in to take care of your asbestos and your lead is a very, very costly thing to have to pay for. So a contingency is really important if you're just knowing the age of your home. All right. So pay attention to the age of your home. If you don't know the history of your home, you may need to be doing some major upgrades when you get into renovating it. And don't be afraid to do this. It's just knowing what your budget can go and what your budget can do for you in these older homes. And also being smart, because you don't want to mess with asbestos and you don't want to mess with lead. These are things that could really affect your immune system. You can affect people around you. You can affect your home atmosphere and, your family. So just being really responsible in that aspect. That's my little soapbox I'm going to step on, but just I'll step down now. Just make sure though that you're being cautious about what kind of materials could be in your home and being prepared for having to need to handle those properly. And then any water damage that you might have had before. So if your roof leaked in the past and you got your roof repaired, you still might have water damage from that leak behind your wall. So let's just say you had a roof leak, you saw it on your ceiling in your bedroom. Now you're renovating your bedroom, you're pulling the drywall down. Now you see that there is wood rot. Wood rot's not going to stop. It's going to continue throughout time. So at this point, now that your walls are open, it's, do you change it? Do you fix it? You might even have mold that you didn't know you had behind there. And now you're, messing with it and exposing it. So again, the containment and properly handling mold, you have the contingency now to handle any kind of unexpected costs there. Outdated electrical, you might need to be bringing your home up to code. So again, if you need to, you got to find out what your jurisdictions require from you and what you'll need. So these are things that you want to be prepared for and things that you are not going to be able to go around if you want to have a quality house and a quality renovation. So if you want to hide that wood rot, you want to hide the water damage, it's going to come back to you in the future. So don't cut corners on these things. This is really important. So if you want to, that's a good point. If you want to save $1 today, you're going to be paying for it tenfold in the future if you don't take care of it right then and there. So handle it when you see it, handle it while it's open, because having to go back and do it again is just going to be a nightmare and cost you more money and more frustration. So I hope this helps. Your costly mistakes that are avoidable and being prepared for the things that are hidden that you may not know or expect. And I cannot say this enough. Just do a little bit of research on what your jurisdiction requires. You can go to town hall, they can point you in the right direction. You don't need to be an expert, but it's super easy to find these codes and understand what they are. They're also online. You can look up the national codes for just our whole, there's the national codes, but then there's also codes that are in your jurisdiction, in your city, in your state. So know where to find these, look for them, and just have a place to reference if you think something's being a little funny. So avoid these costly mistakes, pre-plan, and you'll be all right, okay? Everything will be good. Renovations can be scary, but you can also prepare for them. And then they're a lot less scary and a lot less stressful when you have these things in place. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for hanging out today. If you liked what you heard, please make sure you hit subscribe, and I hope to see you again next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye.